Welcome one and all to Expo Jamaica Virtual B2B Meetings 2021, celebrated this year under the theme, A Vision of the Future.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our panel discussion on building your export markets and logistics. This is a really topical subject, something we really need to dive into. And I have three very important guests with me this afternoon who are going to dive into that topic with me. But before I introduce them, a couple of housekeeping matters. Anyone who wants to ask questions, there is a chat button. Please ask questions through the chat. So really this topic that we have today, building your export markets and logistics, really important topic because we've talked so much in Jamaica about how do we expand our exports and how have we fared during COVID-19. What are some of the mechanisms, some of the companies that we have in Jamaica have used to survive and thrive, because there are a number of companies, three of them sitting here, who actually have thrived during the pandemic. In 2020, Jamaica shipped an estimated $947 million US worth of goods around the globe. This actually was a 21% drop since 2016 and a 40.3% drop from 2019, mainly due to the pandemic, the shutdown of businesses, loss of tourism markets, etc. But while most categories declined, actually the food exports increased to 207 million, which was a 12% growth over 2019. And that's really great to hear. So we had a 24% growth in yam exports. We had a 14% growth in baked products exports. And we had a 6% increase in ackee exports. But we also faced a lot of challenges. We talked about logistics. You know that logistics is facing a huge impact in the world globally. Supply chains are impacted by the slowdown of China, by the return to work or the not complete return to work since COVID, the pent-up demand released by COVID, the lack of shipping containers, the lack of truck drivers, raw material supply chains. So a number of issues have impacted on the supply chain, and we're definitely going to dive into that question today. So, as I said, we have a really great panel today, led by John Mahfood, who is president of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association. John has had a very long career in business and 15 years strong as Chief Executive Officer of Jamaican Teas Limited, where he has successfully directed their export efforts from zero to now 60% of their total sales, which is really phenomenal progress. John is a social justice advocate and serves as chairman of the Whitfield All-Age School and president, as I said, of the JMEA. And his latest crusade, which I'm sure he may talk about, is for the appointment of a Minister of Export to really focus on how do we build exports from Jamaica. Stephen Dawkins, who is sitting second from left, is the export manager for Wisynco Group of Companies, where he has successfully organized their entry and strong enduring presence in several overseas markets. Stephen has also been committee co-chair for export and logistics at the JMEA. And third from left, Drew Gray, who is the chief executive officer of Scotch Boys, which is a manufacturing company doing a number of sauces, and he's also general manager of Gray's Pepper Products. So welcome, panel, and thanks for being with me today. I really wanted to ask all of you, what do you see as the export markets that you are building now, and what are some of the mechanisms you have used to survive and thrive during the COVID pandemic period? Starting with you, John.
Thank you. we started the company in 1996, 97, and from the beginning, we decided that we wanted to focus on Caribbean countries, in particular English-speaking Caribbean countries. We felt that the population outside of Jamaica was about 2.5 million people, and it's similar somewhat to our population, but the difference is that their per capita income is 3 or 4 times ours. So it represents a market that is much, much bigger than our own domestic market, with a similar background and history. And I felt that if your product is successful in Jamaica, there is no reason why you shouldn't be selling the same amount in the Caribbean. If you're selling $1 million a month in Jamaica, that's the aim. You must be selling $1 million a month in the Caribbean. And if you're not doing that, you're missing a great opportunity. And that's how we grew. That's how we started. That's how we directed our efforts. We started out selling 1 box by air to a customer, 2 boxes, 3 boxes, till we got break bulk, then we got containers, and 20 years later, as you said, our exports are 60%. Too many companies in Jamaica just focus on the US market where you can send a container, and they think, you know, well, it's easy to send a container to the US, not so easy to send a container to the Caribbean. But that's our bread and butter, is the Caribbean market, and that's what I would like to see Jamaican companies try to break into that market.
That's great to hear, because you can actually share and consolidate a container into the rest of the Caribbean. And I'm sure that's how you started to build your business. What about you, Stephen? How do you feel about the Caribbean market, and what other markets are you trying to build now?
Thank you, Dianne. We at Wisynco, I've been with the company for about almost 10 years. And when I actually started out, the sales that I'm doing today, in a single month, we are doing what we used to do in a full calendar year. So sales has grown tremendously. Typically, like most Jamaican companies, as John said, we tend to focus on the diaspora markets a lot. Obviously, those are low-hanging fruits, and I would never tell a company not to focus on them. So the diaspora markets include the United States, Canada, Europe, and then closer home to us is the CARICOM markets and CARICOM community, which we benefit a lot from. However, there are markets now that we would deem strategic markets, which are very close to us, and a market like Cuba, in which just 90 miles north of us, we haven't really gotten a chance to move in there. But recently, we have dented that market and is doing pretty well in Cuba. And it's hard for Jamaican companies because of the centralized system that operates in Cuba. In other words, everything that you do must go through government. And of course, we found a way to enter. We enter through an agent that already operates there for many years. We got our products registered with the government, and through the agents, we are now actually selling. Now, it's critical that even the diaspora markets, there are markets that we are not into. For example, the great United States with 350 million people. Yes, the diaspora market is about 5 million or so, but if you're properly structured and properly structure your products offering, you can also enter into the mainstream markets. And that is what we have been doing to get our products internationally ready for the mainstream markets, both in the United States and in the UK.
So I'm sure listeners will be really interested to know what were the challenges of moving from the ethnic to the mainstream market. Can you tell us that in a short?
One of the greatest thing about Jamaicans are influencers, and Jamaica is a great influencing community, and Jamaica as a brand is big. So most often, especially in Europe, whenever you say this is a Jamaican product, it's amazing. Like, for example, Bigger Soft Drinks is into the UK, and that product has constantly grown year over year, and we are doing massive sales with Bigger Soft Drinks. No, the diaspora alone could not be drinking all that bigger that we are sending into the UK. So it would have crossed over into that market. And we tend to capitalize on the product and capitalize on all the activities happen in the UK, like the Olympics and all the necessary things. So the Jamaican flag is on every product that we push out into the markets. So that flag is very prominent on the Bigger Soft Drink. So the consumer will say, once it's from Jamaica, it must be good. And that's how we operate. And I think those are some of the strategic imperatives that we move with to get into those markets.
Great. That's a great success story to hear. And from a company that of the size of Wisynco that has achieved scale and has achieved real penetration of long-standing markets. What about you, Drew? How have you found the importance of the Jamaica brand to help you sell your products? You're a newer kid on the block, I would say, than the two other gentlemen sitting here. How have you found the Jamaican brand helping you to penetrate those markets, and which are the markets you're most focused on?
Okay, yeah. So just to echo on what Stephen said, the US mainstream market is our target as well. And being a younger company, we did all our branding to target that. So we always wanted to be a hot sauce company that just so happens to be Jamaican. And we kind of saw the broad appeal of the Jamaican flag and the brand Jamaica when we were on QVC. Because as you know, the QVC demographic is 35 to 60-year-old white females in the States. And when we aired, I kind of had my reservations as well, because they were saying it might be too hot or they might not like it. But when we finally saw the final sales figures for our QVC airing, even the QVC buyer said we did better than what they expected. So that's really the market that we're targeting right now, the US and the mainstream. Another company that has managed to cross over that ethnic to mainstream is Cholula hot sauce, which is a Mexican hot sauce, but it was just bought for $800 million by a mainstream company in the States. So that's really what we're targeting and focusing. And also with the US, the amount of tools that are available at our disposal right now. So we're doing direct-to-consumer online sales, and through social media, we can decide exactly who sees our product and where, right? So you can have efficient, targeted marketing campaigns, and once you have that website, the customer can buy it while he's scrolling Instagram. So those are really the initiatives that we're taking to focus on the US market.
That's great. And so you're really using e-commerce as your main channel of distribution. And how has the question of logistics come up for you? Because I know a lot of our listeners who are SMEs are going to want to know how you have managed to sell well and successfully through an e-commerce channel.
So, you have to be agile and you have to be creative. So we got our first break when we had a distributor order our products in Canada. So when the distributor ordered it, and when they were placing their second order, we had found an online fulfillment center based in Toronto. So we couldn't afford to send it up at a time. We couldn't afford the freight. So what we did, we called the distributor and said, hey, let me send you an extra 20 cases. Once it lands, I'll buy it back from you. And you drop it off at the distribution center.
Right.
So we did that until we were able to scale up. And then eventually that online fulfillment center in Toronto turned to 2. So we're in Miami now. And it just so happens we're lucky enough to be able to time orders. So if, when we're setting up the QVC order, we sent up an additional extra to the fulfillment center so that we had inventory. So that way you spread your shipping costs across a larger amount of units to keep that cost down. Because that's really, for small companies, that's the barrier to entry. Getting it to the States at a cheap price so that you're competitive.
Thanks for that. I hope the SMEs listening have heard those tips. Agile, creative thinking. So coming back to you, John, we've just lived in a really difficult 2-year period with COVID-19, where logistics costs have increased, tripled practically in many cases. So you're facing increased costs in the movement of goods in and out. And secondly, you haven't been able to really go to the US or to your target markets in the Caribbean and showcase your goods. How have you dealt with those two challenges during the COVID period?
The problems in the shipping costs and the logistics are very complicated. On one hand, if you're an importer of raw materials from the Far East, you have two problems. One is the significant increase in shipping costs, which have gone from $2,000 to $10,000 or $11,000 for a 20-foot container. And the other big problem is you're unable to plan properly in terms of the receipt of raw materials, the timing of shipments. And we have, and I'm sure all manufacturers have the experience of booking something to leave in July, and it still hasn't shipped because there are just no containers available. So you end up either losing sales because you don't have the raw material, or you end up having to buy much more than you want to, and you fill up your warehouse with goods that it's causing you a lot of money to keep. The good thing, though, we have found is that there are some opportunities. For instance, the shipping cost to Jamaica is much less than the shipping cost from the Far East to the US. There is about a $5,000 difference. While it's $10,000 to Jamaica, to New York, it's $15,000 or $16,000. So that creates an opportunity for us as exporters where we are now able to produce products in Jamaica and are able to compete where we couldn't compete before with the Far East. We can now compete and ship to the US products made here. And I think I just mentioned to you that Omar Azan of Boss is now shipping furniture and beds into the Caribbean. He said he had 20 containers because typically beds and furniture are, we are not very competitive, but now he's able to ship because the shipping cost from Jamaica to the Caribbean or to the US is only $2,000 or less. It's a lot cheaper to ship to Trinidad from Jamaica or to Barbados. And so he now can compete with furniture manufacturers in the Far East. And those are things we should be looking at doing, taking advantage. Obviously, the issue of travel and so on and making marketing representations is more difficult physically. But on one hand, you're able to meet your customers a lot more frequently. But it is difficult to actually break into new markets, go to those markets. So one of the things I do for some of my friends in the manufacturing industry is when I'm sending goods to Barbados or Trinidad, I will put samples in my container with their brochures and send it. So while they may not be able to go to every market, if they can find a manufacturer in Jamaica to cooperate, there are ways of getting around it.
Now, but that's fantastic that you have found the niche opportunities within COVID. As they always say, don't let a crisis go to waste. Find the opportunity in the crisis. So where's the opportunity been for you, Stephen, in the crisis? And give us a little bit more of a flavor of how you've been able to crack the Cuban market, because at JAMPRO, I know we both went on several selling trips into Cuba, which just gave us an idea of how long the runway is to get into Cuba and the challenge also of getting paid. So you've been able to navigate those waters. Give our listeners some tips on how you've been able to do it.
All right, let me touch the logistics issues first. Logistics right now, logistics has always been a challenge when you're exporting, always. But it is exacerbated even more with the issue of COVID and so on and so forth. And what persons must recognize is that the Jamaican ports are what you call transshipment ports, right? It's a transshipment port. Most of what leaves or come into Jamaica is transshipment, and it's about 80 to 90% of those. So what happens is that ships, if they do not have the right amount of load, they will bypass us. If the port is clogged by a trucker strike or whatever, they'll bypass us. And in turn, our products get shafted.
Get bounced,
right? So that is a challenge. So I will segue into Cuba right now. So what's happening into Cuba? Unfortunately, there's the political issues involved into Cuba. So you do not have North American shippers or any relationship with shippers going into Cuba. They can't do it for political reasons. So the only shipper that goes to Cuba is a French company, or majority French owned and Chinese owned is JMEA CGM.
Yeah.
So they are the only ones that goes to Cuba. So if they do not have adequate load or containers to load on the vessel, they will delay you until they can maximize or optimize the vessel thing. So that is one of the biggest challenge entering into the market. Now, as Dianne had said earlier, I've been going to Cuba for 5 years, trying to understand the market, trying to understand the nuances and the critical issues with a centrally operated market. And what you find is that they are, from once you get in, you are good. So in other words, they are not a consumer marketing country. So if you have a sauce, for example, John has a tea, and you get that tea in, you get that sauce in, that will be the sauce in the market, right? So they're not going to compete with another market. So the consumer will only have one soda, one type of soda, one type of milk, one type of sauce, one type of tea. So it's that level of negotiation with the centralized system that will guarantee. So from the Wisynco group, Tradewinds Citrus, we were able to get the Tetra Pak squeeze into that market. So that is the only Tetra Pak squeeze that is in the market right now. Because if you understand Cuba, majority, they have, the population is given free stuff. But the other stuff that they buy is like my products, the one juice or the one tea or whatever it is. That is it.
Interesting.
So that is fundamentally what it is. No, it is hard for payments-wise. The government usually asks for payment periods anywhere between 90 to 180 days to pay for your product. Now, as a company, we weren't really having that. So the approach is look at the multiple agents that are already there. So there are agents out of Europe, which is Spain, and then in Central America, it's Panama. So what we did was to negotiate with these agents who had the best option for us, and we identified one, and they buy through us, but we ship directly into Cuba. Now, I could spend a whole day to tell you how difficult it is to get the product in, because a simple thing, when you're loading your containers, they bring their own people to inspect the containers with dogs and special companies and stuff like that. So it's very complex getting in. But what I'll say, when you get in, the volumes are so good that it can only be
makes
be
it
good
worthwhile.
for you. Yeah.
Okay.
So that is, and this happened during the period of COVID and pivoting. So there's no marketing necessary. You just give them a good price, you go in, and that's it.
Yeah. So that's for another webinar. We'll definitely do another webinar on that. So coming back to you, Drew, one of the challenges of scaling up as a small newcomer, how do you plan your capacity? How do you make sure that you're keeping pace with demand, that you have the skill sets, the production capacity, and the managerial capacity to scale up for demand? Because obviously the challenge is always, okay, I'm marketing, and suddenly there's, I get a new listing and boom, the whole thing explodes. How do you plan that? I think this is really interesting for our SME listeners.
Yeah, definitely. So, being a smaller company, we do have capacity issues. We have to program in the manufacturing dates and etc. So, what we normally do is once we start engaging with a new client, there's depending on the client, there's a certain onboarding period. So, we got an order from TJ Maxx, about 2 months ago, and that onboarding period took maybe an additional 4 weeks before we actually got the purchase order. So, I would recommend it for everybody, but we started working on that order before we got the purchase order, and we gradually build up our inventory, etc. There were some nuances with the order because it was to Europe, so the nutritional facts panel had to be different.
And
Ingredients,
the
labeling has to be different, everything. So knowing all of that, we started working on everything at the same time, right? So we started translating the labels, we started sourcing the products, because one of our products are Scotch bonnets that came in the period when it was raining non-stop, and that's not good for peppers. So, we're just constantly sourcing, and then what we try to do is we try and hold an inventory. And then also, depending on the client, and once you're seeking bigger markets, you kind of have a feel of what your capacity is. So if you're working one shift now and you can do 200 cases, if somebody orders 400, you could double up potentially and do it. And then another thing too is people tend to be understanding with COVID now, because we also have to factor in our shipping times. So we say 4-week lead time, and that's what we target. But for example, the port might be congested and it adds a week, but people tend to be more or less understanding with that.
Good.
Yeah.
So you found people more understanding of the challenges of the COVID period.
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
I would add to that, Dan, is that people have to remember there's 24 hours in a day, and most of us in Jamaica work only one shift. So, the last thing you want to do is buy more equipment. Better to use your staff and use the time.
And do a second shift.
And do a second shift or a third shift. And it can be done, as anybody who does it has found a way to do it. And the other thing is to use contract manufacturers. Even in our case, we have to contract with other companies to make our teas when we are not able to meet the demand. And there's nothing wrong in contract manufacturing. And in fact, that's a way to get into business. Drew was saying to me that's how he started out, although he's related to the same company. You can manufacture, other people make your product for you that you have developed, you have done the formulation for, and you spend your time marketing. You don't have to be doing manufacturing and distribution and marketing. You choose what you want to do and what you're good at doing.
Yeah, and if you're good at manufacturing, you just stick to that and let somebody else do the branding and the marketing, etc. So, John, wearing your hat as president of JMEA and talking to some of your fresh produce exporters, how important is cold chain logistics? Because we've heard a lot of talk in Jamaica about the lack of reefer trucks, refrigerated trucks, and the lack of cold chain, cold storage facilities. So we really need to be looking at how important is a cold or a chill chain, not for your product at Jamaica Teas, but for fresh produce and chill product exporters.
Well, I'm not an expert in this area, but what I understand is that number one problem we have in Jamaica is the cost of electricity, and that is a big factor when you look at cold chain in Jamaica. There are public warehouses and so on. There are 3 or 4 big public warehouses for cold chain, but the cost is a factor. And when the government, I think, is looking at future industrial developments, as is being done now. We need to be thinking about expanding the number of cold chain opportunities around the country. I wanted to touch though, just as you have me here, is one of the things Drew is doing is focusing on online selling. And it was brought to my attention when we were running out of stock of boxes, carton boxes, and all the box makers were saying to me there is a shortage of carton boxes around the world, whether it is where we buy our carton boxes from Dominican Republic or from locally, because so much of these carton box suppliers are going to the Amazons and the Walmart.coms and so on, that there's such an explosion of online selling, and they're to the point where they're creating shortages for the rest of us who want carton boxes. So I was saying to myself, I know how hard it is for our company to sell to the diaspora distributors in the U.S. and for those distributors to get into major supermarkets. What is not so hard and what we can all do is sell online. And that, I believe, is the future for small companies like ours and others in Jamaica, is to find a way to break into that online market where you are an equal to anybody else in the U.S., wherever they are. Very few of us can get into Publix and to Winn-Dixie's and so on. They're just not devoting that shelf space. And I implore Jamaican companies to start looking at this. This is going to be the future. And if we're going to expand our exports, it has to be through that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, Drew, you would agree with that, and I'm sure you could share some tips again with our audience.
Yeah, definitely. So just to echo your point, when before COVID, when we first started, our goal was to get into a big retailer. So we got very close. So we were in negotiations with a large retailer that had 16,000 stores across. We're there, and they come and they send us the contract, and there's literally $200,000 of stocking fees. You pay for the space.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how long I sat down in that Excel sheet trying to crunch the numbers to get it to work, and it just wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And we were able to list on Amazon for a little less than 200, and Amazon doesn't charge you up front. They charge you on your per order basis. So I would definitely, and then another thing too is there's the ridiculous amount of Americans are actually subscribed to Prime. I think it's like 120 million. So right off the bat, you open up your customer base to the entire US. And another little nuance that I didn't know until I started shipping with Amazon is once you do fulfill by Amazon, they break your product up and send it to all their warehouses across the states.
So you ship to one place.
One warehouse, they break it up for you. And so no matter where you are in the States when you order, you're going to get that 2-day guarantee to get your products.
That's fantastic. And how difficult is it for you to you have to have a sizable shipment in order to get it to the Amazon warehouse, to that one warehouse?
Well, yeah, we started with just a couple cases because Amazon has deals with UPS. So you actually print the shipping label and slap it on the box and send it. But we were lucky because we were already doing e-commerce in the States. So we shipped it from Miami. But either way, I think the margins on e-commerce, everybody kind of knows that you pay a premium versus in-store because you have to bubble wrap, you have to ship. So you do have more margins to work with once you take the e-commerce route.
And what about shipping directly from Jamaica into the U.S.? You still have to fulfill a 2-day turnaround. Is that feasible with a FedEx or a DHL?
I personally don't do it, just because it depends. Especially with food, with FedEx, sometimes once you ship it through FedEx, the FDA may hold it or they may have questions. So we try as best to do all our fulfillment from the States.
From the States,
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so coming back to you then, Stephen, in terms of, I have to ask you a dangerous question sitting here as JAMPRO. What do you think we need to be doing in Jamaica, and particularly the government, to promote more exports and to create really an easier time for companies seeking to export? How do we create an export explosion from this company? John, I'm coming to you, you know that.
From a diplomatic point of view, I think John would better answer that question. But having been in export for quite some time, right? Exports is not easy. It's hard. And that is one of the things I'll tell anyone going into exports. But it is also fruitful. We are in 31 markets at my last count, and from large volumes going into very small volumes, 31 different markets. And when you're in business primarily to make a profit, or your bottom line having an outcome. So to encourage exporters or business people to realize that goal, they would have to have some support or some mechanism in place if you want to grow the business. Because remember, from our standpoint as manufacturers, you want manufacturing to grow. And in order for manufacturing to grow, to become even a greater GDP of the economy, the government have to see it as a source of growth for the economy. Now, what COVID has done, it has recognized that despite the challenges of the slowing down of the economy, particularly our number one driving or number two GDP, tourism, the manufacturing sector held up, right? And it has proven that if the government recognized this, then they would put more effort into it. I can't tell you I have all the answers, because ultimately it's about incentives, given benefits of exports. We had a 10-point plan that we drafted last year for government, and we needed to look at that. Recently, John spoke about export czar from the JMEA days. We had indicated that that's the only way for a focus-led export market. There are economies smaller than us, that the Singapore, the Malaysia, the stuff, they don't have tourism. Then they focus on manufacturing and exports, and have grown tremendously.
And have very few raw materials like we do.
Exactly.
Singapore does not even have agriculture.
And a brand as Jamaica, it is amazing. So I think we have a lot to do where government and the public sector is concerned to drive the business.
So John, I give that gift question to you.
The other thing I would add in terms of what I think the government can do is, and Dianne, you probably know better than me, is how do we use our diplomatic services more effectively?
Yes.
They're in many markets, whether it is Japan or parts of Africa or Europe, and these are our eyes. I know they're unlike big embassies like the U.S. where they have commerce departments and so on, and maybe we don't. But these are the eyes of Jamaica in those places. They go into the supermarkets, they're shopping, and there must be a way of them saying, okay, I know what we bought and what sells in Jamaica. How can we help the Jamaican manufacturers to make a connection? Maybe it's not fair, but I just feel it's an underserved area. Not underserved, it's an underutilized area.
Oh, absolutely. And to be honest, I mean, I'll make a shameless plug here for JAMPRO. We have actually worked on a program called the Economic Diplomacy Program. And so we have enlisted the help of all of those, not only embassies, consulates, high commissions, but our honorary consuls across the globe, because we have something like 85 honorary consuls who really have very little to do unless they have some Jamaican bad people in their neck of the woods or have to deliver some visas. So we have really started an educational campaign for those representatives so that they start to understand what can Jamaica export, and as you say, go and give us some steer as to where the niche opportunities are in their markets. But it's a
and you said
process.
there were honorary councils and so on, and these are people who are probably
they're business people, nationals of the country,
nationals of the
business
country,
people.
and they can, even if nothing else, introduce us
Yeah.
to others. Because one of the difficulties every exporter, every manufacturer has is how to make that contact. If I, as an exporter, has a customer in Barbados, it's a lot more helpful to Drew if I say connect the two together.
Yes.
And there is that connection helps.
Sure.
The other thing that I just wanted to say too is that while there is no silver bullet in exporting, in the sense that it took us 20 years to slowly build up to where we exceed our domestic market. That was our objective. There are too many companies in Jamaica who only focus on Jamaica. So while when you go into a supermarket, let us say, and I don't know the figure, let's say 40% of the items you buy in a supermarket are Jamaican made. That means there's a capacity and a capability. But if all we did was sold what we sell in Jamaica, if we exported it, it would be a much, much bigger export. That's how I look at it. In other words, let us do the hard work. We in Jamaica are not hard workers, I'm sorry to say, and even the manufacturers are not spending enough time and energy breaking out of their comfort zone of selling in Jamaica. They need, if they're going to increase sales, they cannot increase it by selling to the 3 million poor Jamaican people. They need to be selling it to the 3 million wealthy Caribbean people. They need to get out of their comfort zone and double their sales that they're making in Jamaica. And that will make a big, big difference. Not some all of a sudden expecting TJ Maxx or Walmart to call us and say, listen, I need 10 million US worth of pepper sauce, because it may not happen in your lifetime.
Yeah.
So we have to work day to day to build up what we're doing.
So, Drew, you have 2 minutes to answer the same question. What do you think government should be doing to support small exporters better?
Well, I think I come from a different perspective, because our main barrier to entry, as I said, was always the shipping costs. So if it's a government-led initiative or government subsidized, I think you're speaking about it earlier, a warehouse in the States, or that, you consolidate a 40-foot container once a quarter with all these small businesses, all these small companies. Can be, there's great crafts companies down here, there's great food companies. You send them to the warehouse, so at least they're getting it there cost effectively. Because I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation with supermarkets, a small supermarket chain in California. It's like, we love your sauces. Can you send us a case so we can try it out on the floor, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense for me or them. But if the manufacturers and the exporters had a base in Miami where you could send it, right off the bat, you bring down the case of a sauce from $40 to $20, and then that supermarket can make the margin, and you can make the margin as well. So I think that's something we could look at, just to ease that barrier to entry. And then once the companies grow and get larger, and everybody gets to the point where they're shipping their own 20-foot or their own 40-foot, they can do it themselves. But that could serve as almost like an incubator for small businesses in Jamaica to get their foot wet in the States.
That sounds to me like a business opportunity for an enterprising company to set up a warehousing operation and fulfillment operation in a central point like Miami, because I don't think the government would be good at running that kind of operation. And I'm being very nice about it, that, right?
No, yeah, definitely.
So, but I think that such an operation could certainly be a great help to boost the exports of small companies. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've pretty much arrived at the end of our panel. So it really remains for me to thank our three panelists, Drew Gray, Stephen Dawkins, and John Mahfood, because I think they've delivered really fantastic value today. I think we have had a really in-depth discussion with three successful practitioners in the food and beverage industry as to how you can leverage some of the thoughts you've heard about today to make your business more successful, to make exporting more successful, and really to leverage the power of export so we can build a better Jamaica. Remember to put your questions in the chat, and it's been a great pleasure. I'm Dianne Edwards from JAMPRO, pretty much signing off here this afternoon or today, and it's been a great pleasure to serve you and to deliver value for you, the audience. Thank you.